Hey everyone, and thank you for joining us on Project Fraudster, a collaboration project between Toyota and Georgia State. My name's AJ, so let's jump right in. Let me introduce our team, Team Funtech. Now we represent Georgia State's Foundations of Fintech class, and let me introduce us all individually. We have Adam, Adrian, myself AJ, Ephraim, Hector, and Reed. Now we all come from a diverse set of backgrounds, so let me talk about our presentation order and how we each all came together to come to our recommendation. Now I'm going to walk us through the project scope, basically the guardrails of our project and how we went about our research. Next, Reed and Hector are going to be talking about James. Now James is our customer experience journey. Next, we're going to have Adam and Adrian talk about John. Now John is a malicious actor. He's the one trying to game the system. They're going to pass the baton off to Ephraim, and he's going to give us the cost structure, the precedent transactions, and the research that he did on our recommendation. And then finally, I'm going to wrap us up with a recommendation. Now let's go through the scope. Through our scope, we had a couple of things in mind. We wanted to make sure that we had a systematized business model, something we could automate. With that, we also wanted to minimize friction across our customer experience while maintaining the integrity of security. Next, we wanted to keep in mind some scalability issues, growing from 500 users to 500,000. We wanted it to be fast, simple, and seamless, while also, again, keeping safety in mind, and we wanted the entire experience to be surrounded by the customer. Now let me pass it off to Reed and Hector, who's going to be talking to us about the customer experience.
Thank you for that great introduction, AJ. Now we're going to go through the story of Mr. James. Mr. James is an average working man who decides that he wants to do Uber Eats on the side. But to do so, he needs a great car that is fuel efficient. So Mr. James decides to use Toyota's service. So to be able to use Toyota service, the first thing Mr. James has to do is download the app. After he's downloaded the app, signed in using a phone number or email, he's going to scan his government-issued driver's license. Now that he has his license uploaded, Toyota can make sure that his facial recognition check, using the selfie he's about to take, can match his government-issued ID. We want to make sure that Mr. James is who Mr. James says. Afterward, he's going to go through a quick background check through Toyota services. Once he's been approved, Mr. James is ready to start driving. Now that Mr. James has been approved, he decides he wants to use his service today. So the first thing that he needs to do is go to a location where Toyota is allowing drivers. Now that Mr. James has found his nearest Toyota dealership that is offering cars, he's going to take a selfie next to the car to be able to unlock the car and get inside. Immediately following his selfie, he's going to plug in his phone that he registered his account to into the hardware inside of the car. This is going to make sure that it is Mr. James in the car with his device at the right car. Now the dash cam is going to take a quick selfie check to make sure it is Mr. James in the driver's seat. Once the car and the selfie check and all of the geofencing has lined up, the car is ready to start. Now to Mr. Hector to go a little bit into what Mr. James will experience during the drive.
And now on to the operational experience for Mr. James. While driving, the car will continuously perform selfie checks to make sure Mr. James is the one operating the vehicle. The car will also check to make sure Mr. James's phone is plugged in at all times. If Mr. James ever decides to turn off the engine without concluding the service, Mr. James will have to submit to another's selfie check and also plug his phone back in. Once Mr. James is ready to end the service, Mr. James has to drive the car to a approved drop-off location. After he drops it off, his credit card will be charged for his use of service time. And now on to Adrian and Adam to talk about the fraudulent part or fraudulent way to go about the system.
Thank you, Hector. My name is Adrian, and this next portion of the presentation is focused on user experience if a user was to attempt fraud. This is John. John is going to attempt fraud through our servers and with the ultimate goal of him attempting to steal a Toyota vehicle. Now, before John actually downloads the app, he's going to have to figure out a way to be IMEI verification. What this means is the moment that a user downloads the app, their IMEI is being tracked by us throughout the entire process, throughout the entire service. Now, after he downloads the app, what's going to happen is they're going to ask for a proof of identification. This means a social security number, and on top of that, a photo ID. Now, once that John realizes that he can't provide those two things that coincide with each other, they're going to realize that John is a little suspicious, which means that they're not going to let him rent a vehicle. Now, let's say that John manages to get past these prerequisites. What's going to happen is that upon starting the vehicle, they're going to give him a selfie check, which, again, should he manage to get a fake ID, that selfie check won't coincide with who he says he is. Also, when he plugs in his device, they're going to realize that that is not the same IMEI that he started with, or it is the same one that he attempted to use renting another vehicle. Now, I'm going to pass this off to Adam, who is going to look over mid-service checks throughout our entire service if someone was to attempt fraud.
Thanks, Adrian. Now let's pretend that John magically gets the car to start and move. John will soon realize that the dash cam is constantly taking selfie checks even while the car is in motion. When the servers realize that John is not who he says he is, the servers will send a code to the vehicle revealing that there's fraud taking place. And the next time the car is put in park or turned off, the engine will remain off. When John decides he wants to end his rental, he decides that he will drop his vehicle in any location. When this happens, Toyota will charge his account and put it on hold and possibly termination. Let's say John does not want to return his vehicle at all, and he decides to drive as far away from Toyota as possible. The next time the vehicle is put in park and turned off, the engine will remain off. However, in a case where the vehicle is never put in park and never turned off, Toyota may report a stolen vehicle to the police. And now I hand it off to Ephraim for cost, research, and Precedent transactions.
Thank you, Adam. Now I'll be talking about cost, research, and Precedent transactions. Azure Microsoft is a well-known Face API program, also used by Uber. Now, prices are very scalable, as you can see from the PowerPoint slide. At the bottom of the tier, we'll have $1 per 1,000 transactions when we have 0 to 1 million requests. And it goes all the way down to 40 cents per 1,000 transactions when you have more than 100 million requests. According to Google, identity checks may triple in 2026 from 1.1 billion to 3.8 billion. Now we'll have AJ to give us the recommendations.
Thanks, Ephraim. Now let me walk through what we talked about today. We had Reed and Hector walk us through James, the positive side of the customer journey. And then we had Adrian and Adam walk through John, the malicious side of the customer experience. Both of those journeys ended up at one outcome. The customer was successful and happy, and the malicious fraudster ended up out in the dust. Then we also had Ephraim talk to us about the costs and the scalability involved with using a company such as Microsoft Azure. Now, I'm going to walk us through the recommendations. And using everything that we've talked about today, we believe that the most efficient way to approach this situation is by building an app in-house. With that, you minimize the costs of such as buying another company. You also utilize other companies such as Microsoft Azure as an API to fill in the facial ID gap. You can also use companies such as Twilio or Duo. Those are big names. Those allow you to implement multi-factor authentication and two-factor authentication. And using all of that in mind, we stay within our scope, a fast, simple, seamless, secure business model that is scalable, that keeps the customer around the center of each pinpoint. Thank you so much, and we'll open up for any questions.